Welcome back to Rise of Star TV. Today, I'm really happy to have J. Maxwell from United Kingdom here, who is an experienced martial artist. And hello, Jay. How are you?
Hi, Manusha. I'm very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, Jay, tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, and what you practice and what you teach, please.
Oh, heavens. I suppose the question is where to start. I was talking to someone within the HEMA community recently, and I asked them about their history, their pedigree within HEMA, and they said, "Oh, I've been practicing HEMA for over 20 years." And this was a fairly young guy. And I said, "Oh, what did you start with?" And the response I got was, "Well, when I was a child, me and the other children played with sticks." And he was completely serious when he responded like this. So I'm not sure how far back I'm meant to go when I talk about my martial arts background. When I was in primary school, the martial arts craze of Hollywood cinema was at its peak. And I was inspired by this. I wanted to do backflips and spinning roundhouse kicks and all this kind of stuff. And my mother, who is an old school judoka, said, "No, you're going to do judo." And God bless her for that, because I think it gave me a good grounding. Of course, I didn't feel that way at the time. I wanted to go and do karate because that was a term I recognized. And later I did. But I never really fixated on any of them. I went through many different martial arts over the years. I practiced Aikido, Taekwondo. The one thing that really caught my attention was boxing. Boxing is a very tactical sport. Whether you call it a martial art or a sport, I don't know what the modern term would be for that. But the thing that I think was most important to me was ring craft. And an understanding of keeping the opponent at distance, and something that I think is more and more being lost in modern boxing. But coming on to weapons, I got into modern fencing like anyone does. I wanted to be Errol Flynn and Captain Blood and all of these things. But again, modern fencing didn't really give me what I was looking for until I was in my 20s. I was a penniless student, and like any of these conversations, started with a talk to someone in a pub who said, "Well, look up HEMA." And I did, and I've been practicing it ever since. I think that the earliest record I could find of myself talking to someone in an email about HEMA was in the early 2000s. And I started with English systems. But a few years after I started, I saw an Italian system being performed, which just drew my attention with the elegance of it. And I thought, that's what I want to do. And that's how I found the Bolognese systems, which are what I now teach.
Okay, so you're at the moment, or let's put it this way, you're teaching, or you teach Italian system, no longer English system. Did I understand you correctly?
Not quite. My school is based in London, and we teach what I call Elizabethan swordsmanship. But in Elizabethan London, it was the Italian systems that really took off. The more traditional English systems were considered to be low class, which is pretty ironic, I think, because when you look at the principles, they're more or less the same. But both of them are busy denigrating each other. So Italy was seen as this den of iniquity with terrible food at the time, and was very much spoken ill of. But it was still considered to be the heart of culture. So anybody who was anyone studied the classics, and Italian fashion, and of course Italian swordsmanship flourished in London under Elizabeth. And the maesters, who are the people who under Henry VIII have been given the monopoly to safeguard the English systems, were very much opposed to this sudden influx of Italian sword masters who were charging up to 50 times as much as the maesters could charge. So they were running street battles and constant challenges to duels and people being attacked on their way home and all of this business. So it all really flows into each other. And George Silver, who was the most polemic critic of all things Italian, who made all sorts of outrageous claims about how ineffective Italian swordsmanship is, and you just end up both stabbing each other, then goes on to describe a system that is almost identical to the systems described by the Italians. So really the concepts of national borders and that there are regional systems is more or less stood on its head when you actually read the treatises, and the differences are minuscule. Really, they're all very similar to each other.
Because you just mentioned George Silver, I just what I read, or especially during interviews, was it the main difference between them that the English stressed cutting and the Italians thrusting, or is it not as simple as you can say like this?
It's not as simple as that. The English system does also have thrusting, but I think it more comes down to the manner of gripping the blade. So the English systems wanted to use more of a globular grip. So you have a hammer fist around it, whereas the Italians had developed a system of putting the finger over the front quion, the cross guard, which means that the grip is lying through the palm of the hand, almost as an extension of the arm, which makes point control much easier.
Okay, interesting. Interesting.
And it's considered to be a 16th century development, but we actually have art going back to the 14th and 15th centuries showing this grip being used already.
Do you know this grip in which culture was used much older than that?
Go on.
Persian, Sassanid.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Sassanid. I'm going to send you pictures. Yeah, I'm going to send you pictures of that, of existing swords that the late Sassanid, not early Sassanid, late Sassanid. So let's say 400 after, 400 after Christ, or 450, something like that. You see that their grip is specifically meant like that, that your index finger is above, like this. So it's a special thing like that. It's interesting, isn't it?
Well, please do. I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see some more about how that is used as well.
I mean, the use we don't know. We just know in iconography that the sword was held like that. And I also handled and measured and photographed many Sassanid swords from Iranian museums, and they're in my books as well. Not all of them. Early examples, I mean, they look like a medieval European sword, like with a cross guard, and then the handle doesn't look like that. Later, Sassanid swords, they look exactly like that, where they have, the scabbard has also two P-shaped scabbard hanging system. And then there was that, so it was no longer scabbard slide system between your legs. It was two hanging system, which also influenced Chinese and then later many neighboring countries. But the handle, that's interesting for us, that you put your index finger like that on the grip. The only way you can hold the grip is like that.
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it?
But if we look at North African swords, Tuareg swords, for example, again they have a style that's very similar to a medieval side sword blade. And in fact, they imported many of their blades from Germany, and I believe some also from Italy.
Yes, that's right. I mean, in Indian manuscripts, they call it Frankish swords, the blades which are imported from Europe. Yes, they call it Frankish swords. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, excuse me, go ahead. It just came to my
fascinating.
Mind. Yeah, very interesting.
Oh no, I tend to go off on tangents. What was the subject that we were working on?
We were talking about trusting, or Italians, and then you said actually, the major difference was not thrusting and cutting. The major difference was that the Italians put their index finger, the way they were holding the grip, and then the English had like a globular grip, or if I understood you correctly, more like this. The Italians, for point control, they put their index finger like this. That's what I understood.
Yes, of course. But we also seem to have this holdover concept that British blades are these heavy cleaving cutting blades, and that Italian swords are more like modern fencing epées. And nothing could be further from the truth. When we look at examples of these swords, the blades were very similar, and they were very optimized to their use. They could be up to 1,200 grams, maybe, or as light as 500 or 800 grams. And that includes the basket-hilted swords used by the English at the time. These were not clumsy weapons. These were very efficient and very flexible weapons.
Yeah, absolutely. There are.
Right?
I need to say, from my research for different museums, and there are always, of course, European blades which I handled as well. I have handled blades. Okay, I do mostly Middle Eastern, Asian, also Japanese, Chinese, but okay, I handled many European blades in museums. I have not seen a single culture which produces a blade, ancient, right, or old blades, which are not excellent in quality. The way they hold themselves and they handle themselves, right? So, because they were meant to be used, right? It is not
Of
that,
course.
that's why, when I hear, a nation, a culture says that culture's swords are, or bows or whatever, are clumsy or not good, I always say, okay, guys, take it with a pinch of salt. Take it with a pinch of salt, right?
Well, it all usually comes down to a sense of national superiority and people wanting to claim that what they have is better. When you hear someone say, "This is the ultimate dueling sword," or "This is the ultimate sword design," it's complete nonsense, because every weapon was developed to fill a niche, to serve a purpose. Military technology, and by extension civilian arms technology, develops to serve a specific purpose. Every weapon, every blade is ideal, the perfect development to fill that niche. You could say that the rapier is the perfect dueling sword. Okay. Well, what happens if I turn up to the duel with one of these? Who has the upper hand? Does that class as a dueling sword? What's the difference? So is this the ultimate sword?
Absolutely. Very good point. Excellent, Jay. Very good point. I have another question before we move on to the weapon and classification of weapons, and I'm going to ask you, and many viewers would love to hear your opinion on that. Tell us a bit more about yourself, about your school, your profession, your education and background, please.
Okay, I'm a professional sword instructor in London. The school is called Tempus Fugitives, and as I mentioned, we focus on Elizabethan swordsmanship. But really, swordsmanship is just the foundation. Swords are just one aspect, and the various systems around swordsmanship, such as understanding how to grapple around the blade, how to wrestle, how to use the dagger. But the sword then moves on to sword and offhand weapon to develop the necessary ambidexterity. And from this, we then move on to, for example, the great sword. We move on to pole arms, starting with the partisan, moving on to the lanciotto. And in each case, there is a system to this. So the partisan teaches us cut and thrust with a pole arm. The spiedo, which is very similar in design, is again a thrusting spear-like polearm, but with two wings, which allows us to learn how to control the opponent's blade. And at this point, again, you have to be able to fight close with your opponent. So the teachings from earlier on in the system come into this. And finally, we move on to the ronca, the bill, which is considered by both Italian and British authors to be the ultimate polearm weapon for fighting one-on-one with an opponent at that point in time, because it has hooks and blades, and you can thrust, and even if you miss your opponent, you can lacerate them by pulling the weapon or use one of the spikes to strike your opponent. In fact, when I had my ronca made, the smith who was making it said that he would never make one again, because no matter which angle he approached it from, he ended up cutting or stabbing himself with it. And you can use the fork in the blade to attempt to control the opponent's weapon. But if you were to just start with the bill hook or with the two-handed sword, there are so many variables that you have to have in place and musculature that you have to have developed that you would just be confusing yourself and wearing yourself out before you actually learn everything. So you have to take it step by step to reach that point.
Okay, people who come to your school, do you start with teaching a specific weapon, or did I understand you correctly? You start first with the concept of handling a weapon, no matter what type of weapon.
We don't have such a thing as a beginner's class. I wouldn't want to do that because I don't want to put people in that category. We have fundamentals classes where we focus on the principles of swordsmanship. Every technique, when you open up a fencing manual, what strikes you is all of the pictures of people doing techniques and different things, and you look at it and you think, oh, there's so many things in here to learn. But really what you should be focusing on is that bit at the beginning where they're talking about the principles. Techniques are just principles in action. So when someone turns up to our classes, we put them into the fundamentals class and we go over these fundamentals with the single sword and then with the sword and buckler. But even advanced students, I expect them to go to the fundamentals classes because these are the absolute core of our system. Without these, nothing else works.
Absolutely. Okay, let me just pick up some weapons and ask you, and then we can go from there. You teach longsword, right?
No.
You don't. Okay. A clear no. I mean, these days, few people want to say they teach longsword. Okay, that's interesting. Go ahead, please.
Well, longsword is certainly the most popular weapon. And in Marozzo, which is one of the seminal works we work from, you have this spada duomani, which some people could argue is a very late period longsword. But I see it more as a spadone, a larger sword with more weight in the blade, which again makes the techniques make more sense with this heavier weapon. When you're stepping away with the upward slicing cut, the movement counterbalances effectively with this sword. And it doesn't work the same with a long sword. I think people try to crowbar this system into the longsword category because they want to be able to compete in tournaments with it and say that they do Marozzo longsword.
Could you please expand on that? I know many people who say they practice Marozzo longsword. That's the reason.
Of course, and it's entirely possible that I'm the one who's wrong. This is just my interpretation. To me, the sword that is being used by Marozzo is a 16th century sword with more weight in the blade, which is carried, for example, by bodyguards on a battlefield and used in a different capacity to the earlier late medieval longswords, which would have been used as a sidearm for a gentleman or a man on a horse. And a spadone, a large two-handed sword, would be, I think in a HEMA tournament, just wouldn't be safe to use. So I don't want to categorize it as a long sword because I don't want someone trying to take one of those into a competitive arena any more than I would want them to take a pole arm.
No, of course, absolutely.
And when we look at the cutting mechanics with Marozzo's sword, we see that he's always pulling it to the side, which we see with longer handles, longer grips. If it was a shorter blade, it might be more centered. So this is simply my interpretation that this is meant to be a different sword, a later sword than the traditional longsword that we see in competitive HEMA.
Jay, because many people who watch these channel come, as I mentioned, they're grapplers, MMA, or Kyokushinkai, or boxers, Muay Thai fighters. Could you show them what type of blade? I mean, this is not a long sword, but a spada duomani. Could you show? Do you have something to show us so our viewers can have an imagination what you're talking about?
Well, this is a larger variant than the early 16th century. I don't know if you can get a scale of this here.
Yes.
But that's my forearm on the grip. And my forearm and extended hand doesn't fit the length of it. It comes up to around my forehead when I stand it upright next to me.
Yes. How much does it weigh, Jay? How much does that weigh?
This one specifically, I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to put it on a scale to let you know.
Okay.
But they're certainly not light. And with a long sword, these are actually very well balanced. The two-handed sword was meant to have weight to it.
Okay. And what was the goal or the purpose of having such a large and heavy sword on the battlefield? What could you just expand on it? Explain to our viewers why the sword was so big?
Well, the larger sword was used especially in popular knowledge by the Landsknechte in Germany as a type of stormtroop to break into the pike formations and attempt to disrupt them. And I think that heavily influenced maybe the Italians during the Italian wars. But when we look at the surviving sources, especially in the Bolognese tradition, on the two-handed sword, it's for fighting one-on-one. And we know that these swords, these large swords, were also carried by bodyguards when they were protecting people, because you could take on multiple attackers using them.
Absolutely, you can. It has so much weight and power behind it, of course. It makes complete sense.
That's the idea behind them.
Yes. And then I see there are like some hooks on it. Could you explain the purpose of those hooks on the blade? Do I see it correct? Yes.
Oh, well, when you're getting close to your opponent, often you need to grip your blade further up to choke up on the blade. And these help protect the hand.
Okay. It's like a second cross guard, if I may say so.
Yes.